In this current political climate, significant activist movements and protests have been on the rise in the United States. One movement in particular has gained national and global attention for amplifying women's rights, the Women's March on January 21, 2017, which became the largest single-day protest in U.S. history. In response to the election of President Trump, the march unified the country through several protests, advocating for issues like reproductive rights to immigration reform. It proved to be a great success for women, with an estimated 3.3 million participants in the country. But the Women's March also had a big consequential problem. Women of marginalized groups were being left out. Many critics have argued that the march was primarily led by white women and that it focused mostly on cis white women. When talking about women's rights during the march, women of color, women of the LGBT community, and other underrepresented groups felt excluded from the conversation. After the Women's March, many of these women voiced their dissatisfactions online and on social media, expressing that the protests served the needs of white feminism only. Some even chose not to attend the second Women's March this year because of that very matter. So why does this happen? Why is representation in activism so important? And what more can be done to make social movements more inclusive? Well, the problem was clear. The Women's March, and even historical social movements that preceded it, had a lack of intersectionality, or the idea that various social identities such as gender, race, sexual orientation, and class intersects and overlaps with other social identities. Coined by Kimberly Crenshaw, this theory is a way of understanding how these identities shapes one's experiences.
Many years ago, I began to use the term intersectionality to deal with the fact that many of our social justice problems like racism and sexism are often overlapping, creating multiple levels of social injustice.
So how does intersectionality play into the Women's March? For one, the pink pussy hats, which became a symbol for the Women's March, were criticized for excluding transgender women and women of color who don't have typical female genitalia. Even the origins of the Women's March had some controversy. The march was originally called the Million Women March, the same name of famous marches organized by Black activists in 1997 to address struggles of the Black community. It was later changed after the organizers realized this, but by adopting the name, many women of color felt they were being recognized even before the march.
Brittany Oliver, a civil rights activist, boycotted the march. Like most women, she was originally excited about the idea, but she soon realized that the white organizers had left out women of color.
Even though the name has been changed, it's erasure. Poor communities, Black, brown, indigenous communities in our countries, they're going to be hit the hardest. Their voices need to be the ones that are at the center of any type of march.
Other notable social protests, like Black Lives Matter, also has an intersectionality problem. While the movement called attention to police brutality against African Americans, the stories of female victims were being excluded. In her TED Talk, Crenshaw notes that while everyone knows the names of Freddie Gray, Michael Brown, and Eric Garner, the names of Tanisha Anderson, Sandra Bland, Betty Jones, and countless Black women killed by police were being forgotten.
Why is it that their lost lives don't generate the same amount of media attention and communal outcry as the lost lives of their fallen brothers? It's time for a change.
So in the context of protests and activism, we have to be more inclusive. When we disregard intersectionality in social movements, we risk hearing the stories, needs, and values of marginalized women. We have to start listening to these women who face the added challenges of being a racial minority or a trans person. But things are looking up for marginalized women. Following criticism over last year's Women's March, its organizers vowed to make their next one more inclusive. Just before the second Women's March this year, Tamika Mallory, co-chair of the protest, said, "We're looking at all the communities that we seek to engage and work with, and we're trying to figure out how to deepen those relationships and ensure that all stakeholders are at the table." Recent well-known movements have also brought attention to intersectionality. Take the March for Our Lives, for example, the student-led demonstration which fought for stricter gun control on March 24, 2018. While many of the prominent Parkland students are white, they're using their privilege to highlight that gun violence is an issue that affects people of all classes, races, ethnicities, and other backgrounds.
We openly recognize that we are privileged individuals and would not have received as much attention if we weren't for the affluence of our city.
11 years old Naomi Wadler also gave a powerful speech honoring African American women and girls of gun violence.
I am here today to acknowledge and represent the African American girls whose stories don't make the front page of every national newspaper.
Additionally, the hashtag #MeToo movement has been instrumental in giving a platform for underrepresented women. Tarana Burke, the founder of the viral hashtag #MeToo, aimed to spotlight sexual violence victims of all identities. In an interview with Time, she said in hashtag #MeToo, this work can't grow unless it's intersectional. We can't do it alone and they can't do it alone. Sexual violence knows no race, class, or gender, but the response to sexual violence absolutely does. While there's more work to be done for trans people, women of the LGBTQ community, among other marginalized groups, this is a step forward in recognizing the importance of representing all women when advocating for social justice.